For years, a man faithfully feeds birds every day until his wife notices something strange. Her heart races as she follows him to the park he usually visits during the day. She resents having to sneak after him, desperate to uncover the truth behind his behavior. Exhausted from late-night messages and secretive bathroom calls, she longs for honesty. However, what she eventually discovers makes her feel nauseous. Janine Phelps was never one to pry into her husband Micah's affairs. He had always been attentive to her needs, unlike many of her friends' husbands. But recently, he had become distant, leaving early to feed birds and spending hours locked in the shed. Despite their 5 years of marriage, Janine trusted him implicitly. Yet when a friend reveals Micah's whereabouts, Janine realizes she has no other option. Janine got married to Micah Phelps when she was 29. He was like a ray of sunshine after all the tough times she'd been through. Janine was a student trying hard to succeed in project management. But then something awful happened. She found out her boyfriend from school was cheating on her. He was cuddling with another girl in the bed covers she'd given him for Christmas. Janine was heartbroken and stayed in her apartment, only leaving for classes or groceries. But then one rainy evening, Janine met Micah. He was kind and supportive, never pushing her into anything. He was there for her when she needed someone to lean on the most. Over time, Janine started to feel like herself again. Micah promised he'd never hurt her, and although Janine was cautious at first, she eventually trusted him. So you can imagine how shocked Janine was when a friend told her what they saw Micah doing. When Micah started feeding birds, Janine thought it was a good hobby for him. He didn't usually like going outside, preferring to stay indoors when he wasn't with her or at work. But then, things started to change. Micah's behavior shifted when he started going to the park every morning. It turned out it wasn't just about the birds. He had a big argument with Janine about having kids, and it seemed like going to the park was his way of dealing with it. Janine and Micah decided they didn't want kids. They lived like this for 5 years until Janine's mom started asking questions. Micah got upset because Janine seemed to be on her mom's side during an argument. He left angrily that morning, saying he needed space. When he came back that evening, Janine thought he'd be mad at her. Micah usually held grudges, but this time he acted differently. He didn't talk about the fight and hugged her tightly instead. His hands were dirty and smelled like birds. This was just the start of a tough time. Janine knew something was wrong. Micah usually didn't leave things unresolved after a fight, but he cleaned up and sat in the kitchen while Janine cooked. She felt confused and tried to talk to him, but it led to another messy fight. That night, Micah slept with his back to Janine, which hadn't happened in years. Janine couldn't sleep, feeling lost and hurt. She wondered if she was overthinking things or if something was really going on. To calm things down, she promised to talk to her mom about kids and apologize for her behavior, hoping things would go back to normal. What began as a regular Saturday bird feeding routine in the park turned into a 2-year habit for Micah. He never talked about his fight with Janine, but kept doing things he hadn't done in a while, like going with her to the bookstore, giving surprise gifts, and going on dates. However, when Janine's friends told her where they saw Micah and what he was doing, it brought back all the pain from those 2 years. There was a noticeable change in Micah's behavior. He was hardly ever home, leaving without saying why and coming back in the evening smelling like bird feathers, pretending everything was fine. He'd take calls in the bathroom and get texts late at night. Despite his sweet gestures like helping with dinner or late-night drives, Janine couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After her discussion with her friend, Janine decided to tell Micah one Saturday morning. Her friend Anna tagged along for moral support and as a witness in case something went wrong. They took the least scenic route to the park, ensuring they kept far away from Micah's Jeep so as not to alert him. Janine hoped to put this matter to rest finally. She had no idea what she was about to uncover. Micah pulled into the park's lot and hurried out. His phone was glued to his ears as he jumped over puddles of water on the tarmac, cutting into the immaculate grass. Janine's friend asked her if she wanted to do this. When Janine nodded, she helped her out of the vehicle, and they followed Micah. Her heart thumped in her ears as they turned the corner onto a green field covered with crows. There, amid the black feathered birds, was Micah with a younger-looking woman. Janine almost fainted. Her heart crumpled inside her. Suddenly, she was back in her apartment in grad school, crying herself to sleep after finding out what her boyfriend was doing. She remembered Micah had promised never to hurt her and couldn't believe he'd been leaving the house every day to meet a woman in the park. But that isn't what hurt the most. Janine wondered if she was to blame for Micah's decision. Each of their fights had led to this, and she was just as much to blame for them as he was. But Anna insisted that none of this was her fault. Unfaithfulness was something one person chose and stuck to. If Micah was trying to express his feelings through his actions, Janine shouldn't blame herself for it. But she loved her husband a lot, so she struggled to understand why he was acting this way. They saw Micah talking and laughing with the woman, even caressing her face before feeding the crows. Janine felt furious and wanted to confront them, but Anna advised her to wait until Micah came home. Would that really solve anything? Janine was seething with anger as Anna drove her back home. She was so upset that she could barely see the road. The person she loved the most had made her feel unworthy. At home, she went straight to bed, feeling angry and hurt. But as time passed, her anger turned into sadness. How could Micah do this to her? When Micah came into Janine's life, she never expected to fall in love again. He was patient and caring, helping her heal from her past heartbreaks. When she realized she liked him back, it was a pleasant surprise. And when she confessed her feelings, he felt the same way. She remembered how happy she felt that day when he promised never to hurt her. He kept his promise for 5 years. Janine decided she couldn't wait anymore. She wouldn't sit at home waiting for Micah. She needed answers. So she grabbed her keys, got into her car, and drove back to the park. If Micah was willing to throw away everything they had, she needed to know why. Micah would regret hurting her so much. She sped down the road, her mind foggy and eyes wet and blurry. She was too distraught to notice the cruiser trailing behind her, lights flashing red and blue. She only realized she was being tailed when the vehicle sounded its sirens. Stopping by the side of the road, she trembled with fear and sadness. She'd only wanted to confront Micah. Now she had to deal with the authorities. The officer tapped against her window and Janine rolled it down. She explained why tears streamed down her face and why she'd been speeding, but the officer told her that he didn't stop her because of her driving. She wasn't even speeding in the first place. He told her that she hadn't signaled a few of her turns and could cause an accident. Janine thought he let her go when he asked her out in the vehicle. The officer told Janine she was in no condition to be driving. He asked if he could drive her to the park instead, insisting it was all right. Janine nodded, and together they went to confront Micah. With the officer by her side, Janine's mind calmed somewhat. She even explained her past to the officer, telling him how much her husband's actions hurt her. Her words caught in her mouth as the park came into view. Janine's heart pummeled her rib cage as her eyes landed on the woman again. Micah was still sitting with her on the park bench. He smiled as he ran his hand on her face as if he was helping her with her makeup. The crows around them were calm, watching Micah tear the fabric that held the vows and promises he had once made to Janine. "Is that him?" the officer asked, and Janine nodded. His misery washed through her again. She threw the cruiser's door open, stepped into the park, and headed straight to Micah. But as she got closer, she noticed something was off. The woman seemed to be holding a crow in her hands, which was odd because few people ever hold crows. Janine also realized that Micah had AirPods wedged deep into his ears. He was nodding and mumbling to some unheard music, not talking to the woman. But the closer Janine got, the more she realized that the woman next to Micah hadn't moved an inch. She just sat there smiling next to him as he continued helping with her makeup. Janine noticed the birds weren't moving as well. They didn't scatter around or spook whenever Micah shifted on the park bench. It was then that the truth hit her. "She's a statue," Janine whispered as she got close to Micah. He seemed to realize someone was approaching because he lifted his eyes, his gaze landing squarely on her. His lips curled as he pulled an AirPod out of his ear. "What are you doing here?" he asked, putting down what Janine saw was a paintbrush. "Are you crying?" He came over to her quickly. "No," Janine cried as more tears came out. "I'm not crying, you're crying." Micah held her shoulders, his hands messy with paint, glue, and bird feathers. "You seem really upset," he said, glancing at the officer behind Janine. "Is everything all right?" "Yeah, it is," Janine said, hiding her face in his chest, feeling guilty. "I just miss you, that's all." The officer left as Micah hugged Janine, still unsure of what was happening. Micah explained what he had been doing for the past 2 years at the park. He had been secretly taking sculpture lessons and, with a team of sculptors from town, had made the statue and birds at the park. The statue looked so real that Janine was afraid to get too close to it. She was happy that her husband hadn't broken his promises, but they still had a lot to talk about.